The clock began its slow, heavy ticking, not in some royal chamber gilded with gold, but deep in the hidden folds of the world, where history twists itself into riddles and truth lies sleeping. It began with a theft, and with a girl whose name was whispered like a warning: Red. The first glimpse we catch of her is not through a grand introduction, but through a chase, fast, desperate, dangerous. Shadows cling to the edges of the frame as she races through the darkened streets of Auradon, the stolen artifact clutched tight to her chest. It's a timepiece, ancient and impossibly delicate, its hands moving in ways that seem to defy the logic of time itself. Every step Red takes is a declaration, every heartbeat a drumbeat against a future she refuses to accept. The world she flees through is not the Auradon of old. Though still gleaming with spires and songs, there's a tension threaded through its golden halls. A sense that the sheen of perfection is only skin-deep. And trailing behind Red, not far now, are the forces that seek to preserve that delicate illusion at any cost. As the chase barrels to its crescendo, Red slips away into the fractured borders of the kingdom, beyond the lush fields, beyond the walls polished with pride, into a place where maps crumble and rules lose their grip. The world of Wonderland is awakening, its madness stirring like a beast at the scent of blood. Back within the walls of Auradon, the news of the theft spreads like wildfire. Whispers fill the court. Questions hang heavy in the air. And at the center of it all stands Chloe, daughter of Cinderella and King Charming, draped in the heavy silks of expectation. She is everything her lineage demands, poised, polished, a symbol of the enduring ideals of order and tradition. Yet beneath the practiced smile, there is a restless flicker, a yearning for something more than perfection. Chloe is summoned by the council, a body of once heroes now weighed down by the inertia of their own legacies. They task her with a mission: retrieve the artifact, restore balance, and prevent the destabilization of their carefully maintained world. For Chloe, the assignment is more than duty. It is a chance to finally prove herself outside the rigid framework of her birthright. What neither Chloe nor the council yet realize is that the theft was no random act of rebellion. It was a calculated move, a key turned in a lock long hidden. And the door it opens will not be easily closed. Meanwhile, Red navigates the twisted dreamscape of Wonderland, where gravity forgets its pull and the sky shifts colors with every breath. The environment is alive, whispering secrets and half-remembered warnings. She isn't alone. From the edges of her vision, she catches glimpses, figures distorted by the surreal landscape. Some are enemies, some uncertain allies, all drawn by the ripple she's created. Red's arrival awakens more than just memories. Dormant forces, forgotten relics of the old wars between order and chaos, begin to stir. Wonderland was never meant to be tamed, and Red's presence acts like a spark to dry tinder. The once sleeping realm roils with potential, and not all of it is friendly. At the heart of Wonderland, a labyrinth waits, an ancient puzzle built not to keep people out, but to keep something in. Red, driven by more than simple rebellion, seeks its center. She carries questions heavier than any crown, about her mother, about her own nature, about whether she was ever meant for more than just inherited madness. It is here that Chloe finds her. Their meeting is not a cinematic collision of swords and spells, but something quieter, sharper, a confrontation of wills. Chloe's sense of order clashes violently against Red's anarchic spirit. Words are weapons, glances are shields. Trust, if it comes at all, will have to be fought for. Their reluctant partnership is born out of necessity. Wonderland is not a place for lone travelers. Every step forward is a negotiation with madness. Doors lead to nowhere, riddles twist into threats, and the land itself seems to hunger for hesitation. At first, their alliance is brittle. Chloe moves like a chess master, planning 5 steps ahead, trying to impose logic where none exists. Red charges forward on instinct and fire, smashing through barriers that Chloe can't even see. The tension between them crackles, fueled by a deep, unspoken recognition. They are two sides of the same broken mirror, reflections warped by blood and expectation. Key encounters drive them deeper into the mystery. They meet an enigmatic guide, an inhabitant of Wonderland who claims no allegiance to either Auradon or the old Chaos. Neither Red nor Chloe fully trust them, nor should they. Every piece of advice feels double-edged, every clue a trap. But it's through this figure that they first hear whispers of the prophecy, that one born from conflicting bloodlines could reset the very fabric of their world. The notion terrifies Chloe and tempts Red. Could it be true? Could Red be more than just her mother's fury, her kingdom's shame? And could Chloe, whose life has been a careful script of expectations, find freedom in embracing the unknown? Their journey becomes increasingly perilous. Physical dangers abound, illusionary landscapes that twist into deadly traps, riddles that ensnare the mind. But the greater threat is the one that worms its way into their hearts. Trusting each other means letting go of everything they've ever been taught. And each revelation about their shared history chips away at the walls they've built around themselves. Along the way, artifacts of Wonderland's forgotten past reveal themselves. A mirror that shows not what you are, but what you fear to become. A pool that reflects your life, not as it is, but as it might have been if one choice had been made differently. These moments are not simple detours. They are crucibles, forcing both girls to confront the deepest truths about themselves one night. Camped within the crumbling ruins of an old, enchanted court, Chloe finds herself staring at the timepiece, tracing its intricate carvings. Red, watching her from the shadows, asks a simple, brutal question. If you could change everything, would you? The silence that stretches between them is answer enough. Through these moments, the tension begins to shift. Not dissolve, never dissolve, but evolve. From enemies to uneasy partners, from rivals to something almost resembling friends. They begin to fight not just for their kingdoms, but for each other. But forces older and more cunning than either of them have taken notice. An ancient guardian of the labyrinth, a creature half memory, half nightmare, emerges to challenge them. Its riddles are fatal, its truths sharper than any blade. To pass, they must answer not just with words, but with belief, with a willingness to abandon the easy lies they've lived by. Red, who has always clung to rage as her shield, must admit the fear that simmers underneath, the terror that she is, after all, exactly what they say she is, madness waiting to bloom. Chloe, who has hidden behind duty and decorum, must confess her deepest betrayal. That part of her has always longed to burn it all down and start anew. Their honesty, raw and painful, becomes their salvation. But salvation comes at a price. With the Guardian defeated, the labyrinth reveals its center, a chamber where time itself seems frozen, and at its heart, a throne. Not a throne of gold or velvet, but one of twisted roots and shattered mirrors, pulsating with potential. Here, the artifact Red stole was meant to be placed. Not to claim power, but to unlock something that was never meant to be touched. A vision assaults them, a glimpse of two futures. In one, Auradon stands, glittering but hollow, its peace enforced by tyranny masked as tradition. In the other, chaos reigns, Wonderland and Auradon fused into a realm where rules are rewritten by those bold enough to grasp them. Neither future is perfect. Neither future is safe. As they reel from the revelation, another figure steps from the shadows. A familiar face, one who was supposed to be a legend, not a threat. Their presence alone shifts the ground beneath Red and Chloe's feet, and the betrayal that follows cuts deeper than any blade. Trust shattered, loyalties questioned, the fragile alliance between Red and Chloe trembles on the edge of collapse just as the true danger begins to emerge. Not from without, but from within. And as the hands of the timepiece spin wildly, tearing at the seams of reality, it becomes clear. Whatever choice they make now will not only determine their own fates but will echo across every corner of their fractured, fragile world. The ground beneath their feet was no longer solid, no longer certain. It shifted like a living thing, trembling under the weight of decisions yet to be made. The stolen timepiece pulsed in Red's hand, a heart beating out of rhythm with the world. Across from her, Chloe stood frozen, not out of fear, but from the sudden collapse of everything she had ever believed about duty, destiny, and herself. The figure before them, once a symbol of heroism, now wore a smile tinged with regret. Mal had returned, but not as the champion they had expected. Her voice, low and steady, told a story that neither Red nor Chloe were prepared to hear. Wonderland, Auradon, the very idea of order itself, it had all been a delicate balance, a fragile illusion kept in place by a single truth long hidden from everyone except a chosen few. The timepiece had been crafted not to govern time, but to cage something far more dangerous, possibility. The future had been sealed, forced into a singular, safe path, and Mal, once the breaker of curses, had been part of it. Her betrayal was not one of malice, but of fear. Fear of what chaos might do if unleashed. Fear that the next generation, left unchecked, might shatter what had been so painstakingly built. And now, with the seal broken, the future would split wide open, rushing toward every imaginable end at once. Red's rage flared, a wildfire threatening to consume the fragile alliances that had formed. She had spent her entire life painted as a villain for crimes she had not committed, caged by the expectations of blood and legacy. Now she realized that even the supposed heroes had feared her potential, had chosen to imprison her destiny rather than trust her to forge it herself. The betrayal cut deeper than any blade ever could. Chloe's pain was quieter but no less profound. Everything she had been taught to uphold, the traditions, the peace, the ideals, had been built atop a lie. She wasn't a protector of the realm. She had been a pawn, guarding a cage she never knew existed. Her fingers tightened into fists, not out of anger at Red, but at the realization that she had been complicit, however unknowingly. The choice laid before them was brutal in its simplicity. Allow Mal to reseal the future, to return to the illusion of order, or embrace the chaos and accept the terrifying responsibility of true freedom. But the story had never been about choosing the safe path. Red, burning with purpose, refused to hand the timepiece over. Chloe, after a heartbeat of hesitation, stood beside her. Not as an enemy, not as a reluctant ally, but as something stronger, someone willing to tear down a broken world and build something better, even if it cost her everything. Mal, saddened but resolute, revealed the final piece of the prophecy. The seal, once broken, could not simply be remade. The only way to stabilize the timelines was for the bloodline of chaos and the bloodline of order to willingly surrender their powers into the new future. A sacrifice of legacy itself. In short, Red and Chloe could not just lead, they would have to let go of everything that had once defined them. The battle that followed was not one of armies, but of wills. Wonderland itself rose against them, its reality twisting violently as competing futures crashed into one another. Skies rippled into endless night, rivers flowed upward into the stars, trees bloomed with shattered glass. Every step forward became a test of conviction. Red faced specters of her mother, the Queen of Hearts at her most tyrannical, sneering and snapping, demanding Red embrace the madness, to rule through fear and force. Every cruel laugh, every vicious command echoed inside Red's mind, tempting her to slip into the easy armor of rage. Chloe, meanwhile, confronted visions of her own, a pristine Auradon where she ruled not as a queen but as a symbol, beautiful and hollow, eternally smiling while the people around her lived shackled lives. It would be so easy to accept, to bask in the adoration, to believe in the illusion of peace rather than the messy truth of freedom. But in the midst of chaos, they found each other again. Red, breathing heavily, her hands shaking but her heart steady, reached for Chloe, not with a command, not with a plan, but with trust. Chloe, tears streaking her face, met her hand with her own. Together, they stepped forward. The final trial awaited at the throne, still rooted in the center of the labyrinth. But now it was no longer merely a seat of power. It had transformed into a crucible. The throne demanded not dominion but surrender, the ultimate rejection of the legacies that had forged them. As Red approached, the timepiece in her grasp cracked, its light spilling outward in ribbons of possibility. She saw flashes of lives unlived, a future where she ruled with an iron fist, feared and hated, another where she faded into obscurity, her name forgotten. And there, in the smallest, quietest thread, she saw a different path. Not a queen, not a villain, but a builder. A weaver of new stories. Chloe, too, saw her possible lives. Crowned in splendor, trapped by expectations, or vanishing into comfortable insignificance. And then, a vision she had never dared to imagine. A life of choice, of messy, uncertain freedom, where her worth was not measured in crowns or ceremonies, but in the lives she touched and changed. They stepped into the light together. The timepiece shattered completely, and the throne dissolved into dust, carried away by the wild winds of Wonderland. For a heartbeat that stretched into forever, there was silence. No future, no past, just pure, blinding possibility. And then the world reformed. But it was not the world they had left behind. Auradon still stood, but its gleaming facades had softened. Its rules, once rigid and absolute, had bent to the will of its people. Wonderland, too, had changed, its chaos tempered by choice rather than conquest. Bridges now spanned the chasms between realms, allowing for exchange, for challenge, for growth. Red and Chloe, changed beyond recognition from the girls they had been, stood at the edge of this new world. No titles, no thrones. Just the open road ahead. In the aftermath, they found themselves celebrated not as rulers, but as catalysts. Stories bloomed across the land of the two girls who dared to break the seal, who dared to believe that they could be more than the sum of their bloodlines. But Red and Chloe, for their part, were content to step back into the crowd, to let others take up the work of building the future they had fought for. There were losses, too, sacrifices made along the way. Friends who could not accept the new world, allies turned enemies who chose the safety of the old over the uncertainty of the new. The story does not shy away from the cost of change. It lingers on the empty chairs, the haunted glances, the scars left behind. But it also lingers on laughter, on new traditions born from unlikely alliances, on the small, imperfect moments that weave together into something stronger than any crown. And in the quiet moments, when Red feels the old rage stirring in her chest, or when Chloe feels the weight of old expectations pressing down, they remember the choice they made, not once, but every day. To build, to hope, to rise. The story closes not on a grand coronation or a final battle, but on a simple, powerful image. Two figures standing side by side at the crossroads of what was and what could be, smiling at the horizon. They have no map, no guarantee of success. Only each other, and the endless possibility of the road ahead. Red moves like a storm trapped in human form, fierce and restless, carrying a defiance that feels older than she is. Born into the legacy of the Queen of Hearts, her very name is a weight she has never been allowed to put down. From the moment her story begins, it's clear that Red is not merely rebelling for the sake of rebellion. Her anger, her sharp edges, her relentless refusal to bow are not signs of cruelty. They are shields she has forged to survive in a world that made up its mind about her before she ever spoke her first word. Yet beneath the leather and scowl, there is a vulnerability she guards more fiercely than any crown. Red's journey is not just about seizing power, it is about wresting back ownership of her own story, reclaiming a name that others tried to turn into a warning. Throughout her arc, every decision she makes is an act of redefinition, a refusal to let bloodline dictate destiny. When she faces the mirror of what she could become, an echo of her mother's madness, a ruler shaped by vengeance rather than vision, her greatest act of bravery is not in fighting it, but in stepping away from it. Her choice to destroy the timepiece, to reject the easy path of domination, reveals a soul who understands that true power lies in the ability to choose a different future, not force one upon others. Chloe, by contrast, enters the story clothed in the invisible armor of expectation. She wears her lineage, daughter of Cinderella and King Charming, like a second skin, moving with the grace and precision expected of someone who has always been told what is good, what is right, what is expected. But from the start, there are tiny fissures in that perfect facade. A hesitance in her smile. A flicker of doubt in her steady gaze. Chloe has been raised in a palace of certainties, but deep down, A part of her has always questioned the walls around her. Her character's journey is quieter than Red's, but no less profound. Chloe's strength is not in shattering barriers with force, but in unraveling them from within. When confronted with the truth, that the peace she upholds was built on suppression, that the order she reveres has cost countless others their freedom, her world crumbles. And yet, she does not collapse. Instead, she listens. She learns. She changes. Her decision to stand with Red is not born from impulsiveness but from a profound, deliberate choice to reject the comfortable lie in favor of an uncertain truth. In doing so, Chloe reclaims her own agency, stepping out of the shadow of her parents' legacy to build something wholly her own. Together, Red and Chloe form the beating heart of the story, a dynamic that crackles with tension, admiration, and ultimately, unbreakable solidarity. Their relationship is not easy. It is forged in argument, distrust, and mutual frustration. But it is through each other that they confront their deepest fears. Red forces Chloe to see the cruelty hidden behind the mask of order. Chloe forces Red to see that vulnerability is not weakness. Their alliance becomes something stronger than friendship. It becomes a promise, unspoken but ironclad, that they will no longer allow the world to tell them who they must be. The figure of Mal looms large over the story, even in her limited screen time. Once a symbol of rebellion, she now represents the painful truth that even revolutionaries can become the architects of the very cages they once fought to destroy. Mal's character is a mirror held up to Red and Chloe, a warning of what happens when fear overtakes hope. Her betrayal is not monstrous, it is heartbreakingly human. She acts out of a desperate desire to preserve a fragile peace, to prevent the chaos she once unleashed from devouring everything. But in doing so, she forgets that true peace cannot be built on chains, no matter how noble the intent. Mal's presence challenges Red and Chloe to be better, to learn from the failures of the past rather than repeat them. She embodies the tragic complexity of legacy. How easily good intentions can calcify into tyranny, how vital it is to continually question even the ideals we hold most dear. The guide they encounter in Wonderland, neither fully ally nor enemy, adds another layer of complexity to the character tapestry. Elusive and sly, this figure serves as a reflection of Wonderland itself, ever-shifting, morally ambiguous, refusing to fit neatly into the binaries of good and evil. They push Red and Chloe to question not just the world around them, but their own motivations. Are they fighting for freedom, or merely against those who have wronged them? Are they builders, or destroyers? The guide's riddles and provocations become a crucible in which their true selves are forged. Wonderland itself acts almost as a character, a living, breathing entity that reacts to the emotions and choices of those who traverse it. It is chaos incarnate, a mirror for every character's internal battles. When Red wrestles with her rage, Wonderland warps into jagged, dangerous landscapes. When Chloe grapples with doubt, the land folds into endless mazes, trapping her within reflections of her own indecision. Wonderland strips away pretense, forcing characters to confront the raw, unvarnished truths of who they are and what they desire. Secondary characters populate the world with splashes of color and complication. Friends and foes, some loyal, some treacherous, all shaped by the crumbling walls of a society that no longer fits the shape of its people. There are those who cling to the old ways, desperate for the security of familiar hierarchies, and those who yearn for something freer, something truer. These characters, though less central, underscore the stakes of the story. Change is never without casualties, and every choice Red and Chloe make ripples outward, touching lives far beyond their own. Perhaps the most haunting presence throughout the story is the legacy of their parents, not just as individuals, but as symbols. The Queen of Hearts, Cinderella, King Charming. These figures are myths, looming larger than life, their deeds and misdeeds shaping the expectations placed on Red and Chloe from birth. Both girls must wrestle with the question: are they their parents' daughters, bound to repeat the past? Or can they break free, not by denying their heritage, but by choosing which parts of it to carry forward and which to leave behind? Red's arc finds its climax not in conquest, but in surrender, the surrender of vengeance, of rage as identity. Chloe's arc peaks in defiance, not rebellion for its own sake, but a refusal to be the perfect daughter of a broken system. Together, they embody the twin forces necessary for real change, the courage to tear down and the wisdom to rebuild. In the end, their greatest triumph is not in defeating a villain, but in refusing to become one. The final images of them standing side by side, unnamed but unbowed, resonate with quiet power. They are not queens. They are not saviors. They are not symbols. They are simply two young women who chose to be more than the stories written for them. And in that choice, they become something greater than any crown or kingdom could offer. They become free. There are stories that live within the story, hidden beneath the polished frames and sweeping music, whispered between takes and carved into the bones of a production few truly understand. For every carefully choreographed scene that played out on the screen, there were countless strange and fascinating moments that shaped the making of this film in ways that no script could predict. Like secret rivers running beneath a city, the oddities of the production flowed unseen, nourishing the final result in unexpected ways. One of the first strange truths about the making of the movie lies in its creation itself, a secret tucked away in the earliest stages, when the idea of returning to the world of Auradon and beyond was still fragile, almost tentative. Originally, the story was not meant to center on Red. Early drafts flirted with other characters, old legacies still lingering like fading echoes, but none of them sparked the kind of wildfire the creators were searching for. It was only after a late-night brainstorming session, reportedly involving an entire wall covered in sticky notes and half-forgotten lore from Wonderland, that the idea of the Queen of Hearts' daughter took root. From that chaotic beginning, the story was reborn, tilting sharply into the unexpected. Casting Red was itself an adventure that veered into the surreal. The actress who would eventually claim the role almost missed her audition entirely, having been stuck in traffic caused by a parade in a neighboring city. Legend has it that she burst through the doors with her costume slightly rumpled, her cheeks flushed from running, and delivered a raw, furious reading that stunned the room into silence. Instead of rescheduling, the casting team whispered to each other afterward that the chaos she carried into the room was exactly what the character needed: wild, real, unpredictable. Even the costumes, those dazzling, meticulously crafted pieces of the world's fabric, carried their own hidden histories. Red's primary outfit went through more than 20 redesigns before settling on its final form. Early versions leaned heavily into traditional royal garb, draped in velvet and jewels. But every fitting ended with the same problem. It didn't feel right. It was too controlled, too polished. In a burst of frustration and inspiration, the costume designer ripped off a long, heavy train and slashed a formal jacket into something rugged and sharp. The result? A costume that looked less like it was made for a coronation and more like it had survived a revolution. It became an instant symbol of Red's spirit, unruly, stitched together from the ruins of old traditions. Wonderland, that strange, shifting land of riddles and madness, wasn't created solely with green screens and digital trickery. In fact, many of the most surreal landscapes were built practically, using forced perspective tricks, hidden mirrors, and sprawling sets painted by hand. One field, where gravity seemed to pull sideways, was actually an elaborate tilted platform, causing everything from the flowers to the actors themselves to lean at impossible angles. Filming those scenes reportedly left more than a few cast and crew members mildly seasick, but the result was a world that felt oddly tactile, as if Wonderland might really exist just beyond a hidden door. Another quirk of production was the timepiece, the relic that drives the heart of the story. Rather than rely solely on props created by the effects department, the filmmakers commissioned an actual working timepiece, complete with moving parts designed to turn in seemingly impossible patterns. It took a team of master clockmakers almost 3 months to create, and though it was only glimpsed closely a few times in the film, it became a point of pride on set. Many actors, when not filming, would find themselves hypnotized by the artifact's strange rhythms, losing minutes just watching the hands dance in their illogical, mesmerizing way. One of the most peculiar and beloved stories among the cast involves a certain white rabbit, or at least, a costume meant to resemble one. During a particularly complex night shoot in the Winding Wood set, a crew member dressed as the rabbit, intended only as a visual marker for actors to follow during a chase scene, accidentally wandered into the wrong part of the set. Confused and slightly unnerved, the actors found themselves genuinely chasing a runaway rabbit through the woods, breaking character as they laughed uncontrollably. The footage, shaky and chaotic, was never intended for the final cut, but one brief glimpse of that wild pursuit made it into a fast-moving montage, an unintentional nod to the madness at the story's heart. The production was also famously haunted, or at least, that's what many claimed. The primary soundstage where much of the labyrinth sequence was filmed reportedly had a history of unexplained occurrences. Lights would flicker without cause, props would be found shifted or missing, and several cast members swore they heard voices whispering their names in the empty corridors. Whether it was simply the overactive imaginations of those immersed in a world of magic and mystery, or something stranger still, no one could quite say. But the whispers became part of the set's lore, an unofficial addition to the eerie atmosphere that bled into the performances. In a far lighter twist, the prop department found themselves constantly battling one mischievous element, the enchanted playing cards. Hundreds of oversized cards were created for certain Wonderland scenes, each designed to stand upright or collapse on cue. Unfortunately, the cards had a mind of their own, or so it seemed. More than once, carefully arranged scenes were derailed when a rogue gust of wind, or an overeager crew member, sent a cascade of cards fluttering across the set. Eventually, the crew began treating it as a game, betting on which card would topple first during each take. Music, that invisible thread that stitches emotion into every frame, also carries its own strange tales. The composer, seeking to capture Wonderland's unsettling, dreamlike quality, reportedly spent days recording the sounds of broken music boxes, warped vinyl records, and even the low hum of ancient grandfather clocks. These eerie recordings were then layered into the score, almost too softly to notice, but creating an undercurrent of unease that lingers in the subconscious. Listening closely during scenes set deep within the labyrinth, one can sometimes hear the faint echo of a lullaby played backward, a subtle reminder that not all is as it seems. Even the final battle sequence, that collision of futures and wills, came with its own share of chaos. The visual effects team had prepared a stunning, meticulously planned shot involving the shattering of the timepiece, sending shards of glowing glass into the air. But during the first take, a misfired rig caused the shards to explode with far more force than intended, sending cast and crew ducking for cover. Miraculously, no one was hurt, and the accident produced a cascade of shimmering debris so unexpectedly beautiful that they decided to keep elements of it in the final version. The friendships that formed on set were as genuine as they come. Red's actress and Chloe's actress, despite their characters' initial animosity, quickly bonded over shared long nights and grueling shoots. It became a running joke that their real-life friendship blossomed in inverse proportion to their on-screen rivalry. Between takes, they could often be found huddled together under oversized coats, running lines, or sharing playlists designed to keep their spirits high during the coldest night shoots. One final, quiet piece of trivia lingers behind the last scene of the film. The final image, of two figures standing at the edge of a new world, was filmed not on a soundstage, but at the crest of a real, untouched hill deep in the countryside. It was chosen for its raw, wild beauty, untouched by sets or special effects. As they filmed, a sudden gust of wind swept through the grass, lifting Red's and Chloe's cloaks around them, making them seem almost weightless. It was unplanned, unscripted, but the director chose to keep it, a gift from the world itself, a perfect, ephemeral blessing on the journey they had carved together. These strange, wonderful moments stitched themselves into the fabric of the movie, invisible to most but vital all the same. They are the heartbeat beneath the spectacle, the soul behind the story. And long after the credits roll, those little-known tales linger, secret echoes from a world where magic, madness, and miracles were never just part of the script. They were real, in every laugh, every chase, every whispered promise made between takes, shaping a story that dared to be as wild and wondrous as the dreams that first gave it life. There are moments within a story that feel less like scenes and more like crossroads, where the choices made by characters don't just advance a plot, but echo something far deeper, something stitched into the quiet places of the audience's own heart. From a distance, the events that shaped the movie might look like grand gestures and battles fought across impossible landscapes, but when you step closer, when you let the story breathe against your skin, you realize they are meditations on identity, destiny, and the courage it takes to choose something different. The theft of the timepiece, for instance, is not merely the spark that lights the fuse of the narrative. It is a seismic act of rebellion against the very concept of inevitability. In stealing it, Red does more than defy authority. She rejects the notion that the future is something to be managed, curated, and contained. Critics who dissect this opening move often see it as a bold thematic statement. The idea that rebellion is not always destructive, that sometimes breaking the rules is the first step toward revealing the cracks in an unjust foundation. Red is not just stealing an object. She is unshackling possibility, daring the world to confront the lie that peace can be built without freedom. Chloe's assignment to retrieve the artifact is a reflection of another deep thematic undercurrent, the complicity of the well-meaning. From a critical perspective, Chloe's early scenes are saturated with quiet tragedy. She is not malicious, not cruel, but she is blind in a way that is almost more dangerous. She has been taught to believe in a system that benefits her, and when she moves to protect it, she does so without questioning whether it deserves protection. Her journey, then, becomes not merely one of aiding Red but of tearing down the invisible cage around her own mind. Critics often point to Chloe as one of the film's most poignant creations, a character whose greatest act of heroism is learning to dismantle the very ideals she was raised to uphold. Their first meeting in Wonderland plays like a clash of elements. Fire against marble, instinct against calculation. But within that confrontation is a delicate unfolding of one of the film's core themes, the tension between chaos and order, and the realization that neither can survive alone. Wonderland itself, bending and twisting in response to their presence, becomes a living metaphor for this tension. Critics have praised these sequences not simply for their visual inventiveness, but for their symbolic weight. Every collapsing hallway and shifting landscape a reflection of the internal struggles Red and Chloe must navigate. The alliance they form is not born easily, and that difficulty is part of its brilliance. From a critical lens, the slow, stumbling development of trust between them feels achingly authentic. It mirrors the painful, necessary work of unlearning prejudice, of seeing past inherited narratives to the complicated humanity beneath. Their bond does not erase their differences. It honors them, weaves them together into something stronger. It is a reminder that unity is not the flattening of identity, but the weaving of it. The labyrinth and the figure of the guardian offer another rich vein for critical exploration. More than a simple trial, the labyrinth sequence acts as a crucible of identity. It demands not strength or cleverness, but honesty, a brutal confrontation with the truths the characters would rather bury. Red's admission of fear, Chloe's confession of resentment, these moments strip away the last illusions they carry about themselves. Critics have often pointed to this sequence as the true heart of the film, not the battles or the betrayals, but the quiet, devastating acts of self-revelation that redefine what it means to be brave. Mal's return is one of the most searing narrative choices, and its critical reception reflects that complexity. Once a figure of youthful rebellion and hope, she now stands as a monument to the corrosive effects of fear. Her betrayal is not cartoonish or easily dismissed. It is deeply, unsettlingly human. In her, the film paints a picture of how even heroes can become jailers when they let fear of the unknown outweigh faith in the future. Critics have lauded this decision as a bold refusal to offer easy villains, forcing the audience to grapple with the uncomfortable truth that good intentions are not enough to prevent injustice. The shattering of the timepiece and the dissolution of the throne mark the film's climax not in terms of spectacle, but of philosophy. It is not a villain's defeat that saves the world, it is the protagonist's willingness to let go. This act of surrender, of trusting a future they cannot control, carries a profound thematic resonance. Critics have noted how rare it is for a story aimed at younger audiences to place such emphasis on uncertainty, on embracing the unknown not with fear but with hope. It challenges the pervasive cultural narrative that strength comes from domination, suggesting instead that real strength lies in vulnerability, in trust, in the messy, unfinished work of building something new. The new world that emerges is not perfect. It is a world of bridges instead of walls, of questions instead of decrees. Critics have praised this ending for its emotional and thematic bravery. It resists the temptation to tie everything into a neat, satisfying bow. Instead, it offers something infinitely more powerful: possibility. The final image of Red and Chloe standing at the crossroads, unnamed, unthroned, unbroken, speaks to the film's deepest truth, that the most important journeys are the ones without maps. Emotionally, the film resonates because it taps into universal fears and hopes. The fear of becoming the worst versions of ourselves, the hope that we can choose differently. Red's journey speaks to anyone who has ever been trapped by others' expectations, anyone who has ever been told they were too much, too dangerous, too broken. Chloe's arc reaches those who have struggled under the weight of perfection, who have been praised for their compliance but longed to break free. Together, they offer a vision of liberation that is not about escaping who we are, but about embracing it fully, flaws and all. Throughout its run, the movie has sparked rich conversations among critics and audiences alike. Some have marveled at its refusal to offer simple moral binaries. Others have celebrated its willingness to let its characters be messy, to let them make mistakes and learn and hurt and grow. It has been called a fairy tale for a new era, one that recognizes that the real battles are fought not with swords or spells, but with empathy, with courage, with the relentless refusal to accept a world built on fear. Events within the story are not isolated beats. They are ripples that continue outward, challenging every character, and by extension every viewer, to reconsider what they believe about power, destiny, and choice. The theft of the timepiece, the alliance forged in Wonderland, the confrontation with Mal, the shattering of the throne, all these moments are stitched together by a single urgent question. What kind of world do you want to build? The emotional crescendo reached when Red and Chloe choose to trust each other, to step into the unknown hand in hand, is not just a resolution for them. It is an invitation to the audience. An invitation to believe that the future is not written, that the past does not define us, that we have the power, always, to choose a different way. And it is this emotional and thematic resonance that cements the film's place not just as a continuation of a beloved franchise, but as a work of art that stands boldly on its own. It dares to tell a story where the greatest victory is not the defeat of an enemy, but the transformation of the self. Where love is not confined to romance, but woven into acts of solidarity, of understanding, of shared struggle. In the end, it is not the spectacle that lingers. It is the quiet moments, the reaching of one hand for another in the dark, the whispered promises to do better, to be better. It is the knowledge that even in a world built on broken crowns and shifting sands, there is hope. Hope that we are not bound by the bloodlines that birthed us, nor the mistakes that scarred us. Hope that we can choose again and again to rise. There's always a second story running underneath the one we see on the screen. A quieter, hidden journey made up of long nights, impossible dreams, and the stubborn determination of hundreds of souls all working to breathe life into a world that once existed only in imagination. The making of this film was its own kind of magic, not spun from spells or ancient artifacts, but forged from sweat, laughter, wild ideas, and moments of serendipity that no script could ever predict. The first sparks of creation ignited long before cameras ever rolled. Early production meetings looked less like polished studio discussions and more like chaotic brainstorming sessions filled with sprawling whiteboards, endless cups of coffee, and a palpable sense of daring. The challenge was immense, not just to continue a beloved story, but to reinvent it, to drag it through Wonderland's looking glass and emerge with something both familiar and shockingly new. Every department, costume, set design, effects, music, was tasked not with replication, but reinvention. Filming Wonderland proved to be one of the most ambitious undertakings the production had ever attempted. The director, refusing to rely solely on digital backdrops, insisted that as much of Wonderland as possible should be built by human hands. The result was a labyrinth of physical sets so vast and intricate that some crew members reportedly got lost on their way to lunch. Tunnels twisted into themselves, doors opened into upside-down rooms, and colors bled across walls in ways that made even seasoned cameramen feel like they were dreaming with their eyes open. One of the most fascinating challenges involved capturing the shifting, gravity-defying nature of Wonderland. Traditional camera rigs couldn't convey the unsettling physics the director envisioned. The solution was as inventive as it was demanding. Massive rotating sets mounted on gimbals, allowing entire rooms to tilt, spin, and roll while actors fought to stay upright. Shooting scenes in these sets turned into a test of endurance. One famous day on set saw an entire crew team stumble out of a tilting corridor, laughing and clutching at walls like sailors staggering back to shore after a storm. The timepiece, the film's most vital prop, took on a life of its own. Designed by a collaboration between traditional clockmakers and digital effects artists, it was crafted with such loving precision that many on set began treating it less like a prop and more like a sacred artifact. One particularly memorable day, an assistant director misplaced the timepiece between scenes, setting off a frantic search across multiple sound stages. When it was finally found, perched atop a lighting rig, no one quite sure how it had gotten there, a spontaneous cheer broke out among the crew. Costumes played a crucial role in storytelling, each stitch carrying layers of history and emotion. Red's wardrobe became a symbol of rebellion and self-definition. The head costume designer, inspired by the idea of armoring oneself with past failures, sourced reclaimed fabrics, using torn velvets and distressed leathers stitched together by hand. Some pieces contained hidden embroidery, phrases from Lewis Carroll's writings, stitched so subtly that they could only be found if you looked closely enough. The idea was that Red quite literally wore Wonderland's forgotten words on her skin, carrying the old world even as she fought to reshape it. Chloe's wardrobe told a different story, one of careful construction, of lines so clean they almost seemed sterile. Her initial costumes featured hidden corsetry and subtle restrictions, symbols of the invisible pressures she lived under. As her character grew and changed, so did her clothing. Pieces became looser, lighter, eventually blending the structured elegance of Auradon with the wild vibrancy of Wonderland, a silent but powerful reflection of her journey. The cast threw themselves into their roles with a ferocity that often blurred the lines between performance and reality. Red's actress, known for her fearless approach, performed many of her own stunts, refusing body doubles whenever possible. One grueling sequence, where Red sprints through a collapsing corridor, was achieved in a single, exhausting take after days of rehearsal. The moment she reached the end of the set, breathless and battered but victorious, the crew erupted into applause, not just for the shot, but for the spirit she poured into every frame. Chloe's actress approached her role with a quieter intensity. Between takes, she often remained in character, sitting silently, turning the timepiece over in her hands, sketching maps of Wonderland's imagined geography in the margins of her script. Her preparation was so thorough that many crew members swore she knew the labyrinth better than the set designers themselves. When asked later about this dedication, she simply smiled and said, "I needed to know what it would feel like to be trapped inside a dream you didn't choose." One of the most touching stories from production involved the younger extras, children brought in to populate scenes of the new Auradon. During a break between scenes, Red's actress sat cross-legged with them on the grass, telling stories about Wonderland's oddest creatures, improvising myths and legends that made their eyes light up. One of those impromptu tales, about a brave little mouse who built a bridge between kingdoms, inspired a small, unscripted moment in the final montage, an Easter egg for those who know where to look. Filming wasn't without its mishaps, and some of the best moments came from unexpected chaos. In one key scene, where Red and Chloe confront the shattered remnants of the throne, a rogue lighting rig malfunctioned, sending a shower of sparks across the set. Instead of breaking character, both actresses reacted naturally, Red shielding Chloe instinctively, and the moment was so raw, so perfect, that the director demanded it be kept. Watching the final cut, it's impossible to tell where the script ends and reality bleeds in. Even the soundtrack carried its own tales of strangeness and wonder. The composer, determined to create music that felt half remembered and half imagined, spent weeks recording obscure instruments from around the world. Glass harmonicas, hand-cranked hurdy-gurdies, even ancient bells excavated from forgotten villages. One haunting motif woven throughout the score was played on a broken zither, each note trembling just slightly out of tune, creating an atmosphere of beauty always on the verge of unraveling. The bond between the cast and crew became legendary by the end of filming. Long nights turned into storytelling sessions around bonfires built on the outskirts of set. They celebrated birthdays with surprise Wonderland-themed parties. Inside jokes evolved into ritual, such as the ceremonial unlucky rabbit mascot, a battered stuffed animal that was hidden on set each day for someone to find. By the final weeks of filming, it had been smuggled into dozens of scenes, often hidden in plain sight, a secret known only to those who had been there, and in the quieter moments, when the cameras were off and the lights had dimmed, many would wander the labyrinth sets alone, letting the echoes guide them, letting the dreams sink into their bones. Some whispered that the sets themselves seemed to shift when no one was looking, that hallways ended in different places, that doors that should have led to costume rooms instead opened onto endless fields of paper flowers. Whether it was tricks of memory or something stranger, no one ever really wanted to find out. By the time filming wrapped, there was a palpable sense of bittersweet triumph. They had created not just a film, but a living world, stitched together from thousands of hands and hearts. And though the sets were dismantled, though the costumes were packed away and the lights switched off, something of that world lingered in every soul who had helped build it. These stories, the strange, the wonderful, the utterly human, are the hidden heartbeat behind every frame. They are the secret scaffolding that holds up the impossible dream. They remind us that magic is not something you find on a page or a screen. It is something you build together, moment by imperfect moment, until it stands tall enough to carry everyone who dares to believe. And somewhere, perhaps just beyond the edge of the known world, that labyrinth still waits, its corridors shifting in unseen patterns, still whispering stories for those willing to listen. The world they built for this story was never meant to feel safe. It was crafted to unsettle and enchant in equal measure, to whisper to the viewer that they had stepped beyond the known lands and into a place where the rules of reality could bend, twist, and sometimes shatter completely. Every stone, every shadow, every flicker of light and color in the frame wasn't just decoration. It was a storyteller in its own right, pulling the audience deeper into a realm balanced precariously between wonder and madness. At its heart was the reimagined Auradon, still gleaming but somehow colder, heavier with expectation than ever before. This Auradon was all polished stone, high towers, and manicured gardens, beautiful, certainly, but rigid. Everything in the palace seemed too clean, too symmetrical, as if the life had been scrubbed out in pursuit of a perfect image. The production designers leaned into this subtly oppressive perfection, crafting spaces that, though visually stunning, felt like they could suffocate a person who didn't fit neatly within their lines. It was a conscious choice to let Auradon mirror Chloe's internal conflict. Early scenes bathed her world in warm golden light, but as the cracks in her beliefs began to show, so too did the cinematography shift. Shadows lengthened, angles became sharper, and the golden hues gave way to colder, more clinical blues. Even without a word, the camera whispered to the audience, "This place, this life, is not what it seems." Then came Wonderland, rising like a fever dream from the borders of reason. Where Auradon was order, Wonderland was chaos, rendered in impossible landscapes that constantly challenged the viewer's senses. Production designers built sprawling physical sets wherever they could, stitching together pieces of the familiar with jolts of the absurd. Giant chessboards stretched out like fields. Forests grew trees whose branches were hung not with leaves, but with broken clocks. Rivers shimmered with colors no real water has ever known. The first time Red steps into Wonderland, the change is palpable, not just for her, but for the viewer. The cinematography shifts dramatically. Gone are the steady, symmetrical frames of Auradon. In their place are canted angles, swooping dolly shots, and subtle warps that make the horizon itself feel untrustworthy. Focus softens at the edges, as though the camera itself were blinking in disbelief. Color became one of the film's most potent tools. In Wonderland, nothing was muted. Saturated reds, violent purples, unnatural greens bled across the screen, often layered within the same shot. Scenes that might have felt disjointed in another story instead wove together into a tapestry of barely controlled madness. Cinematographers played with contrast not just for beauty, but to keep the viewer slightly off balance, to evoke the sense that logic was something that could slip through your fingers at any moment. Lighting was its own language. In Auradon, illumination was even, almost sterile, designed to flatter and mask. In Wonderland, light came in sudden bursts or deep pools of shadow. Lanterns flickered unpredictably. Sunlight fractured into rainbows without warning. At times, the only light came from the bioluminescent glow of strange plants or the eerie pulse of the timepiece itself. Darkness here wasn't just an absence of light, it was alive, waiting, pressing in at the edges of sanity. One unforgettable set piece was the labyrinth, a physical and psychological maze that became the crucible of the story. Its construction blended practical effects with subtle CGI enhancements to create a space that genuinely disoriented both actors and audience. Walls seemed to breathe. Pathways shifted behind characters when they weren't looking. Reflections whispered promises that didn't match the movements of the people casting them. The use of mirrors, real, cracked, and sometimes liquid, added another layer of unreality, making it impossible to tell whether a corridor led forward, backward, or nowhere at all. Cinematographers chose to shoot many labyrinth scenes with handheld cameras, allowing the lens to sway and stagger slightly with the characters' movements. This technique, combined with tight framing and unpredictable cuts, gave the sense that the viewer, too, was trapped, struggling to find bearings in a world that refused to stay still. The throne room at the heart of the labyrinth was perhaps the most visually striking set of all, a cavernous space built not of stone, but of twisted roots and shattered glass. It shimmered under an unnatural light, casting long, distorted shadows that made it impossible to judge distance or direction. Production designers drew inspiration from Gothic cathedrals, abandoned greenhouses, and underwater shipwrecks, blending elements into a place that felt both sacred and utterly broken. Throughout the film, the interplay of setting and cinematography wove a continuous dialogue with the characters' emotional journeys. Red's early scenes are drenched in motion. She is rarely still, the camera tracking her with kinetic energy, often framed against backgrounds that seem to hem her in or loom over her. As she gains agency, the camera pulls back, gives her space, frames her against open horizons even in the most twisted corners of Wonderland. Chloe's progression is captured in the changing quality of light around her. In her first scenes, she is often bathed in soft, diffuse glow, framed in ways that flatten her into an ideal. But as her worldview shatters and reforms, the light sharpens, carving out the planes of her face, rendering her more real, more grounded. By the climax, Chloe moves through spaces that are wild and unpredictable, but the camera treats her not with the awe it reserved for Auradon's monuments, but with intimacy, with trust. One of the film's most quietly brilliant choices was the sparing use of traditional establishing shots. Rarely were viewers given the safety of a wide, orienting view of a new location. Instead, scenes often began in close-up, of a hand brushing against a strange plant, of a foot stepping hesitantly onto a shimmering bridge, before slowly pulling back. This technique forced the audience to discover Wonderland the same way the characters did, piece by piece, never knowing if the next step would lead to wonder or terror. Sound design worked hand in hand with the visuals to deepen the immersion. In Wonderland, natural sounds were subtly wrong. Birds chirped notes from nursery rhymes, wind rustled leaves that whispered fragmented riddles. Even silence was weaponized, with scenes cutting abruptly to a hollow, ringing quiet that heightened tension more effectively than any orchestral swell ever could. The visual effects team approached their work with a philosophy of grounded magic. Wherever possible, digital elements were layered onto practical footage rather than replacing it entirely. A twisting tower might be built up to a certain height with real materials before morphing seamlessly into impossible architecture. This blending created a world that, despite its absurdity, always felt solid enough to reach out and touch. One of the film's most quietly brilliant choices was the sparing use of traditional establishing shots. Rarely were viewers given the safety of a wide, orienting view of a new location. Instead, scenes often began in close-up, of a hand brushing against a strange plant, of a foot stepping hesitantly onto a shimmering bridge, before slowly pulling back. This technique forced the audience to discover Wonderland the same way the characters did, piece by piece, never knowing if the next step would lead to wonder or terror. Sound design worked hand in hand with the visuals to deepen the immersion. In Wonderland, natural sounds were subtly wrong. Birds chirped notes from nursery rhymes, wind rustled leaves that whispered fragmented riddles. Even silence was weaponized, with scenes cutting abruptly to a hollow, ringing quiet that heightened tension more effectively than any orchestral swell ever could. The visual effects team approached their work with a philosophy of grounded magic. Wherever possible, digital elements were layered onto practical footage rather than replacing it entirely. A twisting tower might be built up to a certain height with real materials before morphing seamlessly into impossible architecture. This blending created a world that, despite its absurdity, always felt solid enough to reach out and touch. The rotating hallway scene, one of the most technically demanding sequences, was a minor miracle in its own right. Built on a giant gimbal, the hallway could spin a full 360 degrees, creating the illusion that gravity had abandoned its post. Red's actress insisted on doing the scene herself, refusing a stunt double. She spent weeks training, building core strength, and practicing controlled falls. The day of the shoot, with the set creaking and groaning like a living thing around her, she nailed the shot in a single brutal take. When she staggered out at the end, covered in bruises and grinning like a warrior, the entire crew broke into cheers. But not every challenge was so physically grand. Some of the hardest moments came in the smallest, quietest scenes. In one, Red and Chloe share a rare pause inside the labyrinth, their guard down just enough to reveal how deeply scared they are, not just of failing, but of becoming the worst versions of themselves. Filming it took hours longer than scheduled. Not because the actors struggled, but because the rawness of the scene kept breaking the crew. Lighting technicians, camera operators, even the director himself, all found themselves blinking back tears between takes. It was a reminder that the real magic of the story wasn't in its sweeping vistas or gravity-defying stunts. It was in these moments of stripped-bare humanity. The director, known for an almost mischievous style of leadership, often kept the energy on set playful even during the grueling days. Pranks became part of the culture. One morning, the actors showed up to find their trailers wrapped in vines and paper flowers, transforming their little slices of reality into Wonderland gardens. Another time, the director replaced the normal call sheets with riddles, requiring the cast and crew to solve them just to find out where they were supposed to be. It kept everyone a little off balance, a little on edge, perfect for a film where the ground was supposed to shift underfoot. There was a running joke about Wonderland time on set, born from the countless technical delays that plagued the more ambitious effects shots. Scenes scheduled for 2 hours often stretched to 6, sometimes longer. Instead of frustration, the cast adapted, using downtime to explore the sets, improvise new scenes, and sometimes even nap in the shadow of giant mushrooms or inside broken clock towers. Those long, meandering hours became woven into the fabric of the film's soul. Time lost, time twisted, time remembered. Weather, too, played its own tricks. During a crucial outdoor shoot meant to capture the final moments of Red and Chloe's journey, a dense, rolling fog descended without warning, shrouding the set in thick, shifting mist. At first, panic flared. The shot was impossible under such conditions. But standing on the ridge, staring into the pale haze, the director had a realization. The fog wasn't ruining the scene. It was perfect. It turned the final shots into something dreamlike, timeless, exactly the feeling the ending needed. With minimal lighting adjustments, they rolled the cameras, and what was once a problem became one of the most breathtaking sequences of the entire film. One of the unspoken heroes of the production was the prop department, who created not just the timepiece, but hundreds of smaller objects that fleshed out the world. Every book, every playing card, every cracked teacup scattered across Wonderland was hand-designed, aged, and placed with care. Hidden messages were etched into props, snatches of poetry, names of forgotten characters, even tiny jokes meant only for the sharpest-eyed viewers. It was their quiet rebellion, a way to remind everyone that in Wonderland, nothing was ever entirely as it seemed. The music department, meanwhile, worked in near isolation for months, crafting the score from fragments of broken sounds. In addition to traditional instruments, they recorded the creak of ancient doors, the sigh of wind through rusted pipes, even the sound of pages turning underwater. These strange noises were woven into the music so subtly that most listeners would never consciously notice them, but they feel it, that edge of unreality that hums beneath every scene. As the weeks turned into months, the weight of the project grew heavier. Exhaustion set in, tempers occasionally flared, but so too did the bonds that would carry them through. There were late-night walks through the empty labyrinth sets, actors and crew wrapped in heavy cloaks against the chill, talking not about filming, but about life, about dreams, about fears. They became a fellowship, not unlike the one their characters fought to protect, a band of wanderers carving a new world out of nothing but imagination and grit. By the time they shot the final scene, there was a kind of reverence hanging over the set. No jokes, no distractions, just a quiet understanding that something precious was ending. When the director finally called "cut" for the last time, no one moved at first. Red's actress and Chloe's stood together, hands still clasped from the final take, and slowly, the crew began to clap. It wasn't the raucous celebration of most film endings. It was something softer, something heavier, a mourning and a gratitude tangled together. In the months that followed, the sets were dismantled, the props packed away, the costumes archived. But something lingered long after the physical pieces were gone. A shared memory. 1,000 unseen threads tying every cast member, every crew technician, every stunt performer and background actor to a dream they had made real for a little while. Behind the story the world saw was another story, one written in bruises and broken clocks, in laughter and lost hours, in fog and forgotten riddles. A story that whispered, even after the final frame had faded to black, that the best magic is the kind you create together, one imperfect, wondrous step at a time. And in that, perhaps, lies the story's deepest magic. It does not offer a fantasy of easy victories or perfect endings. It offers something rarer, braver. The reminder that freedom is messy, change is painful, and hope, true hope, is something you build, broken piece by broken piece, with your own two hands. The themes and symbolism do not sit quietly beneath the surface, waiting to be noticed. They rise like rivers through the cracks, flood the spaces between words and images, demand to be felt as well as seen. They are the pulse in Red's defiant stare, the tremor in Chloe's first steps away from the golden cage of her past, the whispered promise that the future, fragile, frightening, glorious, is ours to create. There is a kind of sorcery hidden in the bones of a movie, not in its spells or its spellslingers, but in the choices made moment by moment behind the camera, in the hush before the director calls action, in the long aching hours where 1,000 pieces must be stitched together to breathe life into an imagined world. The filmmaking that shaped this story was not flashy or indulgent. It was carefully, ruthlessly constructed to make the world feel alive, dangerous, and heartbreakingly real. Every camera angle, every note of music, every ripple of light through the shifting skies of Wonderland worked in concert to pull the audience deeper into a dream that always hovered just on the edge of nightmare. It began with a philosophy, to create a world that felt unstable, unsettled, constantly threatening to tip into chaos, and to do so without losing the emotional core of the characters trapped inside it. The director and cinematographers spent long months designing a visual language where movement, framing, and color would echo the inner lives of Red and Chloe. Stability belonged to Auradon, with its clean, rigid compositions, its symmetrical architecture bathed in sterile light. But the moment the story crossed the threshold into Wonderland, all of that precision fractured. Camera work became a kind of living character once the characters entered the unknown. Static shots were abandoned almost entirely. Instead, the camera prowled, swayed, trembled, as if struggling to stay upright in a world that refused to hold still. Wide-angle lenses were used sparingly, but when deployed, they distorted the edges of the frame, making corridors stretch unnaturally, turning ordinary doorways into looming, hungry mouths. Tracking shots often started smooth and confident before veering off balance just slightly, that half-second of unease that lingers like a forgotten dream. Handheld shots came to dominate the film's emotional centerpieces, particularly within the labyrinth. Following Red and Chloe closely, the camera sometimes stumbled with them, sometimes pushed too close, forcing the viewer into an intimacy so raw it felt intrusive. When Red faced the cracked mirror that showed her a future twisted by anger, the camera tightened, trembling almost imperceptibly, framing her reflection from angles just a little too steep, as if the world itself recoiled from what it showed her. Editing played its own subtle tricks. Scenes cut not always on action, but on emotion, on a tightening of Chloe's jaw, a flicker of doubt in Red's eyes. Transitions bled into each other, particularly during dreamlike sequences. A fall that began in one scene would land in another, a scream would stretch into the whistle of a distant train. This fluidity blurred the lines between reality and memory, heightening the sense that time inside Wonderland did not obey the old, familiar rules. In the quieter moments, the editing slowed, lingered, let silences bloom like bruises. One unforgettable sequence, a wordless walk through a field of broken crowns, lasted almost 2 full minutes without dialogue. It was a risk, in an era where pace often reigns supreme. But it paid off, letting the weight of everything left unsaid settle onto the viewer's shoulders like a mantle. Sound design, often the most invisible of filmmaking arts, roared to the forefront here. Every setting had its own signature soundscape. Auradon hummed with faint, orderly music, the subtle clicking of clocks, the whispered rush of wind over marble. It was beautiful, but sterile. In Wonderland, sound became unpredictable, even aggressive. Footsteps echoed when there should have been silence. Distant laughter twisted itself into weeping if you listened too long. Water flowed uphill with a soft, menacing gurgle. Doors creaked open not with a groan but with a long, exhaled breath. The timepiece, that heavy heart of the plot, carried its own sonic signature, a low, rhythmic ticking layered with the faintest sound of gears grinding against themselves, just slightly off-tempo. As Red and Chloe carried it deeper into Wonderland, the ticking grew louder, more insistent, seeping into the background of scenes where no sound should logically reach. It became a ghost following them, a constant reminder of the choices waiting to be made. Music itself was treated almost like an unreliable narrator. Traditional orchestral swells were used sparingly, reserved for the rare moments when wonder eclipsed fear. More often, the score was jagged, fragmented, stitched together from half-remembered melodies played on instruments just out of tune. At times, the music seemed to fight itself, harmonies collapsing into dissonance, building tension not through volume but through absence, a sudden drop into a well of silence that left the audience breathless with dread. When Chloe first stepped into the labyrinth, the soundtrack did not rise triumphantly. It faltered, hesitant, as though the land itself doubted her ability to find her way. When Red, bloodied and furious, confronted her mother's legacy, the music didn't scream. It whispered, low and cold, slipping under the skin where it could not be ignored. Color grading played a crucial role in shaping the mood. Early scenes in Auradon leaned heavily into golds and soft pastels, lulling the viewer into a false sense of safety. But as the story plunged deeper into Wonderland, the palette shifted sharply. Colors became harsher, more saturated. Purples bruised into reds, greens soured into sickly yellows. Whites, when they appeared, were not pure but tinged with cold blue, a constant visual reminder that innocence in this world was a fragile, imperiled thing. Visual effects were used not to overwhelm but to unnerve. Practical sets were enhanced, not replaced, with CGI. Subtle manipulations, a flickering horizon, a sky that shifted color mid-scene without comment, created an atmosphere of constant, low-grade instability. Even when nothing overtly magical happened, the audience was made to feel, deep in their bones, that they were walking on ground that could give way at any moment. The winds that blew through this story carried more than dust and dreams. They carried the heavy, unspoken weight of ideas so old and raw they could only be glimpsed through riddles, broken mirrors, and stolen moments of honesty. From the first stolen step into Wonderland to the last breath of a new world being born, the film wrapped itself in themes as tangled and rich as the vines that choked its abandoned thrones. Themes of identity, choice, legacy, and freedom wove themselves into every beat, every whisper, every flicker of light and color. And hidden within its wild heart, symbols bloomed, dark, luminous, and unforgettable. At its core, the film dared to ask the question that haunts every generation standing in the ruins of the one before it. Are we doomed to repeat the past, or can we choose something different? This question beats beneath every scene like a second, fiercer heartbeat. Red, burdened by the blood of a queen whose very name was a warning, embodies this struggle with brutal clarity. She is rage and rebellion made flesh, but also the gnawing fear that no matter how hard she fights, she will always become the thing she despises. Chloe stands on the other side of the mirror, a child of order and expectation, raised within walls so beautiful and high she never thought to question what they kept out. Her arc is no less fierce, the slow, painful awakening to the realization that the rules she trusted, the traditions she honored, were built not to protect but to control. Both girls are trapped by legacies they did not choose, and the film's emotional power surges from their refusal to be quietly consumed by them. Symbolism courses through every element of their journey, starting with the timepiece itself. At first glance, it is a simple artifact, a relic, a MacGuffin to be chased and fought over. But look closer, and it reveals itself as the story's bleeding heart. Time, in this world, is not a river but a cage. The timepiece is a physical manifestation of the attempt to freeze the future, to lock possibility inside the safe, familiar patterns of the past. Its theft, and eventual destruction, becomes not just a plot point, but an act of revolutionary defiance. Red and Chloe are not merely stealing an object, they are stealing back their right to choose, to stumble, to build futures that have not been preordained. Wonderland itself becomes the ultimate symbol, its impossible landscapes mirroring the internal struggles of those who walk its shifting paths. It is a place where the known laws of reality fracture and reform without warning, a world that punishes certainty and rewards those who can adapt, question, change. For Red and Chloe, Wonderland is not merely a setting. It is a crucible, burning away illusions, stripping them down to the truth of who they are. Every twist of the labyrinth is a trial of identity. The mirrored corridors, endlessly reflecting distorted images of the self, whisper the film's most painful question. Are you merely a reflection of those who came before you, or can you shatter the mirror and become something new? Red, confronting visions of herself twisted by anger and vengeance, fights not an external enemy but the darker echoes of her own soul. Chloe, gazing into futures paved with silent compliance, sees the slow death of her spirit dressed in a crown. The throne at the center of the labyrinth, crafted from broken roots and shattered glass, is perhaps the film's most potent visual metaphor. It is not a seat of power, but a monument to the ruins of ambition. Anyone who seeks to claim it must sit atop the wreckage of what came before, must wear a crown fashioned from the jagged remnants of dreams that once promised to save the world. Red's decision to destroy the throne, to refuse the hollow seduction of rule, becomes the defining act of the story. She does not conquer Wonderland, she liberates it. Themes of freedom and self-determination bleed into every relationship. Red and Chloe's alliance is not an easy friendship built on instant trust. It is carved, blow by blow, from suspicion, anger, misunderstanding. They are forced to confront not only the lies others have told them about each other, but the lies they have told themselves. Their growing bond becomes a living symbol of the film's belief in the transformative power of empathy. The idea that true change can only be born when we see each other not as symbols of old wars, but as fragile, stubborn, yearning human beings. Even the visual elements reinforce the story's thematic depth. Auradon's gleaming cities, all sharp angles and sterile light, represent the suffocating grip of perfection. The idea that order, when enforced without question, becomes its own kind of tyranny. Wonderland's wild, unpredictable landscapes, by contrast, embody the terrifying beauty of freedom. Messy, painful, unpredictable, and absolutely necessary. Light and shadow dance across the story with symbolic weight. Early scenes bathe Chloe in soft, golden light, cocooning her in the illusion of safety. As her certainty erodes, the light sharpens, casting longer shadows, illuminating the cracks in the facade. Red, often wreathed in harsher, wilder lighting, gradually moves into softer frames as she embraces not just rage but hope, a hope fragile and fierce enough to defy the darkness clawing at her heels. Music, too, weaves its own symbols into the fabric of the story. The haunting leitmotif that threads through the timepiece's appearances, an eerie, half-forgotten lullaby, carries the sorrow of generations forced to sleepwalk through lives scripted for them. As the story unfolds, the music shifts, fragmenting, rebelling against its own melody, finally swelling into a new, untamed song at the moment the old future shatters. One of the film's most heartbreaking subtexts is the cost of change. It never promises that transformation will be painless or universally welcomed. Red and Chloe lose friends, allies, even pieces of themselves along the way. Some characters, too afraid to step into the unknown, cling to the ruins of the old world. The film honors their fear without condoning it, recognizing that not everyone can walk the same path toward freedom. There is a moment, small but searing, when Red finds an abandoned crown half buried in the wild grass outside the shattered throne room. She lifts it briefly, the gold tarnished and bent, before letting it fall back to the earth. It is a silent renunciation, a symbolic burial of the old idea that power must always be claimed, that legacy must always be worn like armor. In letting it go, she claims a different kind of authority, the authority of choice, of agency, of forging a life measured not by bloodline but by action. And so, the film's ultimate message is neither cynicism nor blind idealism. It acknowledges the weight of history, the scars of inheritance, the gravitational pull of the past. But it insists fiercely that the future is not a gift to be handed down, it is a battle to be fought for, step by uncertain step. Every moment of the story, from the first daring theft to the last uncertain stride into a new world, sings with that defiant hope. The final images do not promise an easy road ahead. Red and Chloe stand not before a kingdom neatly restored, but at the edge of something wild and unfinished. They are not queens. They are not conquerors. They are architects of possibility, walking into a future they will have to shape one choice at a time. Some of the most astonishing techniques were hidden in plain sight. For instance, many of the reflective surfaces in Wonderland were actually semi-transparent, allowing for ghost images to drift faintly behind the characters as they moved. It created a disorienting effect. Red and Chloe were always followed by possibilities, by versions of themselves that flickered in and out of existence just beyond reach. The box office production mirrored the film's thematic ambition. From the beginning, expectations were high, but so too was the risk. This was not a safe sequel. It was a reimagining, a reinvention that could have alienated as easily as it could have captivated. The studio's gamble paid off. Marketing leaned into the mystery, the danger, the promise of seeing beloved worlds twisted into something darker and richer. Early teasers showed almost nothing of the plot, focusing instead on mood, glimpses of crumbling crowns, the flash of a mirror cracking, the slow, relentless ticking of the timepiece. When the film opened, it shattered projections. Audiences responded not just to the spectacle but to the emotional rawness beneath it. Critics praised it for refusing to pander, for trusting its viewers to sit with discomfort, to wrestle with the same doubts and fears as the characters. Word of mouth spread like wildfire, and what might have been a niche film became a phenomenon. But beyond the numbers, beyond the headlines, there was something more precious, a resonance. Viewers returned to theaters not just for the sweeping battles or the dizzying visuals, but for the feeling of recognition. For the knowledge that they, too, could walk into the labyrinth of their own fears and emerge, wounded, changed, but unbroken. In the end, the filmmaking techniques didn't just serve the story. They became part of its DNA. The camera's unease, the music's whispered warnings, the colors that bled and bruised across the screen. All of it built a world that felt as fragile, as dangerous, and as full of fierce hope as the girls who fought to remake it. It wasn't just a movie you watched. It was a world you fell into, and if you were brave enough to stay, it left you marked, carrying the echoes of Wonderland in the way you looked at your own reflections, in the way you listened for ticking clocks, in the way you remembered that even in a broken world, you still hold the power to choose your path. Long before the first frame flickered to life on the screen, Before Wonderland unfurled its tangled roads and Auradon gleamed under its heavy, gilded skies, the heart of the story was already beating. It beat in the laughter shared between actors behind the scenes, in the tearful confessions during interviews, and in the electric anticipation that crackled through theaters as audiences leaned forward, eager to lose themselves in a world that felt somehow both new and achingly familiar. The cast and the audience didn't just meet the story, they became part of it, breathing life into a dream that refused to stay locked in the pages of a script. The casting of Red was a gamble that felt, in retrospect, almost fated. She arrived in the audition room carrying the storm in her eyes. No polished monologue, no carefully curated act. She threw herself into the character with a rawness that left the room stunned into silence. In interviews later, she would laugh about how nervous she had been, how she had thought she'd blown it. But everyone who saw her read that day knew she wasn't acting. She understood Red, her rage, her loneliness, her desperate, clawing hope, as if the two of them shared a heartbeat. Chloe's actress came from a different world altogether. Known for her poise, her luminous screen presence, she seemed almost too perfect for the role of a princess shaped by tradition. But beneath the polished surface, there was a quiet ferocity. When she spoke about the role in early interviews, her voice would tremble, not from fear, but from a deep, trembling love for Chloe's journey. She talked about the invisible pressures of expectation, about the quiet rebellion of choosing your own path even when the whole world wants you to follow theirs. It wasn't just a character to her. It was a mirror held up to every young person taught to smile and stay silent. The chemistry between Red and Chloe's actresses wasn't scripted. It wasn't something that could be manufactured through rehearsals or direction. It was born in the tiny moments between takes, in the way one would glance at the other for reassurance, in the way they'd instinctively mirror each other's stances when arguing through a scene. They disagreed often, about line deliveries, about character choices, about whether a scene needed more anger or more tenderness. But those disagreements never fractured their bond. They forged it, made it something real and bruised and beautiful, something that translated into a connection on screen that audiences felt deep in their bones. In interviews during the promotional tour, they teased each other mercilessly. Red's actress would laugh about Chloe's endless script notes. Chloe's actress would roll her eyes at Red's improvisations. But when asked what they admired most about each other, their answers always circled back to the same place: courage. The courage to be vulnerable, to be messy, to tell the story not as it was expected to be told, but as it needed to be. Other cast members brought their own kind of magic. The mysterious guide who haunted their journey through Wonderland was portrayed by an actor known for disappearing into roles, and interviews with him were as enigmatic as his character. He spoke in riddles, half joking, half serious, about the nature of transformation, about the price of freedom. One moment he'd wax poetic about the symbolism of the labyrinth, the next he'd break into mischievous laughter about how many times he got lost on the actual set. The director, during press events, often looked less like a conquering hero and more like someone still half lost in the dreamscape he had helped build. He spoke passionately about trusting the audience, about refusing to handhold or over-explain. His philosophy was clear: if you're brave enough to ask hard questions, you must be brave enough to leave some of them unanswered. The first wave of audience reactions hit like a tidal force. Early screenings were filled with restless, eager energy, the kind that buzzes through a crowd when they sense they're standing at the edge of something rare. As the credits rolled on those first nights, there was silence. Not confusion. Not disappointment. The kind of silence that blooms when people are still too stunned, too cracked open, to speak. Reviews poured in across every platform imaginable. Some marveled at the film's visual daring, its refusal to play safe. Others praised the complexity of its characters, the way it trusted them to be flawed, contradictory, achingly real. But the most common theme, the thread that wove through every forum post, every whispered conversation as audiences trickled out of darkened theaters, was gratitude. People spoke about how they had seen themselves in Red's fury, in Chloe's quiet rebellion. They wrote about carrying the weight of inherited expectations, about the terror of choosing a different path when it meant walking away from everything you were taught to revere. They shared stories of dreams they had buried, of fears they had finally found the words to name. One reviewer wrote, "This isn't just a movie you watch. It's a maze you get lost in. It's a mirror you don't recognize at first, and when you do, it hurts. But it also heals." Social media became a tapestry of fan art, theories, essays dissecting the film's smallest symbols. Some fans created intricate maps of Wonderland's shifting geography. Others compiled playlists inspired by Red and Chloe's journey. A few even wrote letters addressed to the characters, thanking them for giving voice to struggles that had felt, until then, unbearably private. But it wasn't just the heavy themes that captured hearts. Audiences reveled in the small, surprising moments too. The mischievous humor hidden in the background, the wild beauty of Wonderland's ever-changing landscapes, the lingering shots that let emotion ripple and settle like falling leaves. One particular moment, barely 10 seconds of screen time, became a touchstone. Red, standing before the shattered throne, reaches back without looking, and Chloe's hand finds hers, steadying them both. It wasn't in the script. It wasn't rehearsed. It was a pure instinct between the actresses, born from months of trust and stubborn, messy love for the story they were telling. And audiences felt it. They clung to that moment, to what it said about hope and solidarity without needing a single word. In later interviews, Red's actress would tear up when talking about audience reactions. "You always hope," she said, voice thick with emotion, "that when you give everything you have to a story, someone out there will see themselves in it. But you never really expect it. And when they do, when they tell you it mattered, that's magic. That's everything." Chloe's actress echoed the sentiment, adding that for all the epic battles and impossible landscapes, her favorite part of the entire experience was reading the messages from fans who said, simply, "Thank you for showing me it's okay to want more." The film's critical success was reflected not just in glowing reviews but in its enduring presence in the cultural conversation. Months after its release, it still lingered, quoted in late-night conversations, dissected in college film classes, woven into fan art and tattoos and whispered promises between friends. The cast continued to champion the film, not as a perfect creation, but as a living thing, imperfect, defiant, unfinished in the best ways. When asked what they hoped audiences would take away, they always returned to the same hope, that viewers would feel braver after watching. Braver to question. Braver to change. Braver to believe that even the smallest hand, reaching into the unknown, can shape the future. In the end, the film wasn't just a story told by a cast or a crew. It became a story told by everyone who carried it with them afterward, who saw in its cracked mirrors and shifting corridors a reflection of their own journeys, their own fears and triumphs. And maybe, if you listen closely even now, you can still hear the echoes of that dream. Laughter tangled with tears, footsteps chasing hope through endless, shifting hallways, a promise whispered from one heart to another. You are more than the road you were given. You are the mapmaker now. Some stories do not end when the credits roll. They linger, like the last warm light of sunset clinging stubbornly to the sky, like the echo of a voice you almost recognize whispering just out of reach. And as the journey through this world draws its final breath, we find ourselves not at a tidy ending, but at a beginning we never saw coming, a doorway cracked open just enough to glimpse the road still waiting to be traveled. We have wandered far to reach this place, through corridors that twisted memory and dream together, through kingdoms built from cracked crowns and broken mirrors, through landscapes that demanded not only to be seen, but felt. From the first pulse of rebellion in Red's defiant heart to the quiet courage blooming in Chloe's steady hands, the story was never just about a world divided between chaos and order. It was about the battle inside each of us to decide who we will become. We explored how the film shaped that journey with its haunting settings and shifting cinematography, where every tilt of the camera, every flicker of unnatural light, whispered that stability was an illusion, and that the only way forward was through uncertainty. We saw how sound became a ghost, threading through scenes, carrying the ticking of an impossible timepiece, the size of a world too weary to keep its secrets any longer. How editing turned dreams and reality into a tapestry you could lose yourself inside, and color grading pulled emotion out of the sky itself. We traced the themes and symbolism stitched deep into every frame, the relentless pull between legacy and self-definition, the aching tension between duty and freedom, the brutal, beautiful truth that salvation is not something handed down but something fought for, scar by scar. We saw how Wonderland was not just a place but a reflection, how every step through its impossible geography mirrored the internal wars waged inside Red and Chloe, and inside us. We walked behind the curtain and glimpsed the creation of this world, the late nights, the improbable choices, the accidents turned miracles. The hand-stitched costumes that bore the fingerprints of rebellion, the rotating hallways that left actors breathless but lent a reality to scenes that no CGI could replicate. The playful pranks, the whispered doubts, the deep-buried faith that if they built this dream well enough, someone, many someones, would step inside and find themselves changed. We listened to the voices of the cast, voices still vibrating with the fierce, messy love they poured into these characters. We saw them wrestle with these roles as if they were wrestling with pieces of themselves, refusing to let Red and Chloe be anything less than true. We watched as the audience responded with an outpouring not just of praise, but of recognition, of gratitude. Letters written to fictional characters. Songs composed in dim bedrooms. Drawings sketched on the corners of notebooks, prayers and promises wrapped in color and light. In every frame, every whispered confession, every hand reaching toward an uncertain horizon, the story reminded us, this world was never about perfect victories. It was about choosing to rise, again and again, even when the path was broken and the future unwritten. The beauty of this film, the reason it left such an indelible mark, is that it never tried to hide the cost of change. It did not offer a sanitized vision of rebellion or a fairy tale where all wounds are healed by the waving of a wand. It showed that building something new is messy, painful, uncertain, and worth every breath, every fall, every trembling step. And maybe that's why, as the screen darkens and the echoes of Wonderland slowly fade, we don't feel the hollow ache of an ending, but the quiet, thrilling tremor of possibility. Because the Rayall story was never confined to the borders of a film. It lives now in every person who watched and saw their own battles mirrored there, who saw in Red's stubborn fire and Chloe's determined grace a piece of their own long, messy, beautiful fight to become.